letter number 8, we are introduced to what Screwtape calls the Law of Undulation. The word undulation is from the Latin word unda, which means wave. And so undulation, ups and downs, what he calls peaks and troughs. And you have to recognize when he talks about undulation and peaks and troughs that he's talking about all of human life. Physical life, emotional life, professional life, relationships, as well as spiritual life. That there are times that things are going very well for you, they're going well for you in terms of your understanding, your energy, your drive, and then things where it bottoms out, where you're in a valley, you're in a trough. Things are not going as well, not as focused, not as much energy, emotional low, problems in your relationships. This is characteristic of human life because we're not just spirits, but we are spirit and animal, body and soul. And to be in a body means that we're going to have ups and downs. We're going to have energy, we're going to have lulls, we're going to have zip and drive, but we're also going to have depression, lowness. This is something that simply characterizes all animal life and all physical life. What you want to be aware of is how to manipulate these peaks and troughs so that it will be advantageous for the devil. You can get the idea, Screwtape warns, that somehow this patient is losing his faith because he's in a trough. No, troughs are natural to human life. The challenge for the devils is how do we make use of this trough that this guy is now in. Screwtape gives a description, a wonderful contrast of the difference between the way that devils look at human beings and the way that God himself looks at human beings, the enemy in his words. He really does want to fill the universe with a lot of loathsome little replicas of himself, creatures whose life on its miniature scale will be qualitatively like his own, not because he has absorbed them, but because their wills freely conform to his. We want cattle who can finally become food. He wants servants who can finally become sons. We want to suck in. He wants to give out. We are empty and we would be filled. He is full and flows over. Our war aim is a world in which our Father below has drawn all other beings into himself. The enemy wants a world full of beings united to him, but still distinct. It's important to understand that God has made us free, that our freedom is a part of his plan, that he doesn't want a universe of robots, that he doesn't want a universe of automaton. He wants a universe of creatures that are able to choose his goodness and choose it through their own power. This, of course, also means that they can reject it through their own power. This is evidently what happened to the fallen angels at the beginning of history, that some number of them rejected God's goodness. And this is something that we can choose to follow. We can choose to imitate his example. But God works with us in these troughs so that we can become more deeply and more profoundly his children, his sons and daughters. By way of contrast, the devil doesn't want that freedom. He doesn't really want us to be free. He may talk a lot about freedom as part of his propaganda campaign, but what he really wants is a will that he can possess. When you look in the scriptures at diabolic possession, what's happening is that the person is taken away from themselves. They're absorbed. Their will is robbed in some way. Their humanity, the way in which they are made to the image and likeness of God, is distorted. And what the devil is doing is undermining that beautiful work that God has made in making us free. In Mere Christianity, Lewis talks about how it is that free will, though it makes evil possible, is also the only thing that makes possible any love or goodness or joy worth having. The happiness which the good God designs for his higher creatures is the happiness of being freely, voluntarily united to him and to each other in an ecstasy of love and delight, compared with which the most rapturous love between a man and a woman on this earth is mere milk and water. Well, that same language is used here in the Screwtape letters. Notice how Screwtape will talk about how God cannot ravish. He can only woo. Many readers, I think, are unused to that language. But woo, to court, like to seek a woman's love honorably for marriage, not to ravish, not to seize by force, to seize by violence. God's love for man is like someone who is courting a woman, in which he is free to say yes or free to say no. When you look at the Old Testament, God is often described as a lover, and the people of God, the chosen people, are described as a beloved that is often, more often than not, faithless, even unworthy of that love, and yet he continues to pursue. Well, what God is trying to achieve, according to Screwtape, during these troughs, is that you have somebody who's in a spiritual low. They don't feel as though somehow God is there, and yet this person is able to continue in their faith, to continue their commitment. They're able to hold on to that love of God they have, even when it's unpleasant, even when the very acts of worship or prayer may be difficult and unpleasant, yet somehow that they make their way through that strengthens them. John of the Cross wrote a work in the Christian tradition, The Dark Night of the Soul, in which he describes this very thing that Screwtape seems to be describing, a creature who looks around at a universe from which every trace of God seems to have vanished, and asks why he's been forsaken, and yet still obeys. This, of course, is what's embodied in Christ on the cross when he calls out, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? This intense sense that somehow God is not there. And yet there is this resolution, there is this choice to hold on to the love of God, even when it's not pleasant, even when it doesn't seem rewarding, but that somehow at the end this union will continue and this sense of God's presence will return. Well, in the next letter, we will continue with the law of undulation. And now that Screwtape has explained how God uses this law of undulation, he uses the troughs, we will look at what Screwtape recommends for how the devils take advantage of these troughs.